Hello, Made to Thrive Nation. Today's guest is a special light being, resonating frequency, a life sharer, a life giver. He's a witness to love. He's a man that I've been following for a long time. He is triple board certified, but I must see that on the side. Welcome to the Made to Thrive show, Dr. Zach Bush.
Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Steve, and your whole audience. It's just such a remarkable time in history when a global community gets to come around, shared vibration and vision for the future. And never before have we had such dire circumstances, and therefore never before such great opportunities to come together as a humanity. And honored to be here with you and your audience here.
Brilliant. I'll give you a little bit of a frame. We've just jumped on. I do want to discuss cancer. When I was at medical school in the 90s, cancer wasn't even on our radar. It wasn't a common chronic disease. I want to talk about what cancer is, possibly even, Zach, who cancer is. I believe cancer has a personality, a character, how we embrace cancer, how we live with cancer, when we get cancer. So these are some of the questions that can sit in your subconscious mind as we start this discussion about cancer that has really just grown in so many aspects. 24 years of practice, I've never seen something proliferate at this rate and affect so many people. But I do want to start with this, and it's something that I think is important. I see you as those many things I described. I see myself as a redeemed spirit by a living Trinitarian God that is an eternal being first, and then an eternal doing, living in this physical tent called a body. But for people listening out there, I know you have a huge fan base all over the world. Who is Zach Bush?
I'm a pretty simple kid. I really enjoy many simple things, most of all building things. I love to build, and I did when I was a kid. I was Legos back then, and then it turned into cars that I started building when I was an early teenager. Then I started building houses and such in my late teens. Then I started building landscape design and all that in college years. And then during that, started going into medicine and started building research, as my next kind of playground. And in the end, I find myself to be a kid who likes to build in the sandbox, and my sandbox keeps changing shape, I think. But I'm a pretty simple kid that likes to build things. I like to see concrete movement forward, and I tend to get myself in a bit of an emotional state or a bit of an emotional sense of disempowerment when I'm not engaged in a building process. And so that's a bit of who I am as a personality. On that bigger scale that you're talking, I think, you speak to it strongly there. And I think there is a real deep sense after many years in medicine, and my third subspecialty was in hospice and palliative care, that gave me a lot of insight into what it looks like when we let go of the body and what we get to see on the other side of that veil, because oftentimes those patients are coming back and forth across that veil multiple times in those last few hours and days of their lives. And we get to see a lot about life in the topic that we call death. And so in that journey, I certainly came to see each individual as, that eternal light source that you speak to. And this human body seems very, very limited in its capacity to define or limit the reality of that bigger being that continues after we let go of these bodies. That being continues, obviously. And that's not only something I've witnessed at the bedside of hospice patients, it's something that's been proven deeply in physics. That's the second. Actually, the first law of thermodynamics really gets at that, which you can either, create or destroy energy. Energy can only be changed in its form. And I think that I've managed to fit a lot of energy that we might call a soul into a physical being, into a physical body that's now moving forward, and really honored to be, in this body at this time.
Brilliant. I want to start with two stories as we start this discussion on cancer that has impacted so many people's lives and still really affects me to my core. But one was in 2006. I'm sitting in the theater. We're struggling to fall pregnant with our second child, Zach, and we had gone to the gynecologist, gone to infertility specialist, and he said eventually, okay, got to do surgery, have a look for endometriosis, and find this massive tumor. I get a call at my practice, run down there. My wife's still in recovery. And a pathologist friend of mine that was in the medical building has this tumor in this white tub. And as we walk down the stairs and we open up this bottle, out comes this huge tumor, this teratoma with hair and nails and teeth. And there was an emotion of fear that I'd never experienced. The what if of my wife, the what if of future children, the what if of being alone. And in that moment, I felt a force, it was almost evil that came out of it. There was this resonating frequency that I felt. And for quite a few years, 26th of March, 2020, I felt that again. And I was driving to work, not a single car on the road. First day of lockdown, I get in there, essential services, my secretaries have lined up the patients. And as I step into the door, I feel this force of fear coming from the patients, of uncertainty and instability. And I realized that this fear carries such force, such power. This belief is so integral into how we live, how we have our beings. And so from that place of fear, and I must say, I'm still on a journey, but I've recognized fear and being able to sense it and discern it far more as one of the root causes of many diseases. But start the journey of how we unpack cancer with regards to fear.
Yeah, it's what an intense experience you all had. Just taking pause for that story right there. There's a lot to unpack right there. You guys are at that moment of the greatest hope that anybody ever goes through of having a child, that greatest awe-inspiring moment, and then to be faced with what's ultimately a tumor or a cancer diagnosis. It is such a radical shift in energy. And so talking about energy cannot be anything but transformed. You guys went through a transformative moment there, shaped by human emotion. And it's something that I often wonder about in the animal kingdom. We see hints of emotion in some animals, but I think that it's dangerous to superimpose a human experience of emotion on the animal natural world kingdom kind of thing, because we're inherently looking at that through a human lens, which is inherently emotional. I think that animals are capable of, at moments, some sort of sense of connectedness to other people's journeys, and whether or not they ever miss those that have gone before them. We can see the elephants stirring the bones of their ancestors and the like. There's certainly a sense of connection to that, but I doubt that it has that same emotional overlay that you're speaking to in this human journey of cancer, for example. And so it's very important for us to realize that as we see a world declining, biology declining around the world, the sixth extinction that's unfolding here, we've lost an estimated 50% of life on Earth over the last 50 years. We've had a 10,000 times increase in the rate of extinction of species. It's interesting that we don't see in those other species cancer, heart disease, autoimmune disease, all these things. So that's very interesting to me, that here's species that are being taken to their own extinction. So biologic stress at extreme levels. Why isn't it appearing as it does in humans? As we push ourselves towards extinction, we're expressing disease in a way that the rest of nature does not do it. And I believe it has something to do with this issue of emotions that you were speaking to there, whether it be fear, guilt, shame. I think those are the three big drivers in the emotional realm of deep disease. And the way in which we manifest disease in different organ systems has to do with which emotions are dominant in that play. Maybe anger is somewhere in that mix as well. But I think anger can be in a pretty pure state of kind of righteous anger, if you will. And it can be one that comes out of fear. And so anger may be an expression of fear, guilt, and shame, and may be more of the grief process rather than a true expression of anger or something like that. So there's healthy forms of grief, there's healthy forms of anger, there's healthy forms of a lot of things. But if they're coming out of a space of fear, guilt, and shame, then it's there. So in my worldview, which may or may not be accurate or complete, it's those three emotions that we need to pay attention to when we start to see humanity expressing a disease perspective or profile or a landscape, if you will. And cancer sits right in the midst of, I'd say, all three of those. Cancer is ultimately a disconnect of a single cell from its greater organism. And so it's an inherent loneliness at the cell level. And it's interesting that we can see cancer occur in many different organ systems that hold the energy of these three emotions. Fear tends to really be expressed at deep levels of the bone to spleen kind of region of, Chinese medicine, 4,000 years of kind of depicting where these meridian run and how we store emotional energy and how that depicts in disease. That fear is deep in there. And so when we start to see leukemias, lymphomas, these blood-borne diseases that come out of bone, and they affect the spleen, and the spleen's the big clearing thing. So when we're talking bone, blood, spleen kind of access, that's really this deep fear piece. Interestingly, guilt tends to settle deeper down in the colon or deep down at the bottom of the colon where the prostate lies. So colon cancers and prostate cancers, I think, tend to be expressions of guilt or shame, or rather than fear as the predominant emotion, perhaps. And then we can see unhealthy versions of anger presenting in the pancreas. We can see unhealthy, unresolved, unprocessed grief occurring in the lungs, and therefore setting you up for a lung cancer or a pancreatic cancer or whatnot. And so these emotions and where they are stored have for 4,000 years been recognized in medicine to be a driving force of where the disease occurs. But what is cancer is very simple. It's a cell totally isolated from its environment, from its original origin or organism. And so that disconnect leads to a failure to repair. And I think that's really important for all of us to recognize that isolation leads to an inability to repair. And that's really important when we think about the mental health explosion that's happening around the world right now. We were told, all of us, for 2 years, go into isolation. Go be afraid of your neighbor, be afraid of other people's breathing on you, be afraid of other people. And that was layered upon a social reality that had already become the norm, that we were already exhausted of trying to engage. And if we could justify isolation as a public health intervention, we all rush towards that. And not every last person, but as a society, 7.8 billion people decided to do that. And so I think it was because of the setup, because we were exhausted of trying to figure out where we fit into the organism, and that deep belief that we were already disconnected, that we didn't belong, that nobody could see us or hear us, or we couldn't trust anybody. 4,000 years of empiric colonialism and destruction and extraction had driven all of us to this brink of just a lack of connectedness, a lack of trust. And if we could find something like a virus to suddenly give our rationale to why we feel the way we do, and maybe it's the virus that's making us feel that way, and maybe it's the virus that we should really justify all this fear we feel within ourselves. Oh, thank goodness the solution is to be alone in our houses. There's a socially acceptable reason now to unplug from work, unplug from social circles, unplug from social expectations, and just stay at home. I think it was really, the table was so well set for our collective behavior over the last couple of years. But as soon as you disconnect, you cannot repair. We know that at the cellular level. We've proven it time and time again in basic science labs all over the world that study cancer. When you can't repair anymore, the interesting immediate result of that is you can't produce enough energy. And so as the first system that gets disorganized or unrepaired is that of the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are small bacteria that grow an organic garden inside of each of your cells. There's organic soil basically inside each cell, 200 microorganisms inside every single human cell, 2,000 inside of a single human neuron. And so your more energetically demanding cells are going to have more and more of these mitochondria living inside of them. So you have this great micro ecosystem living within each human cell. When that human cell gets disconnected from its nature, when it gets disconnected from its larger organism, the first to suffer are the soil within the system. And as that soil of the mitochondria, and that microorganism environment dies or becomes dysfunctional, there's less energy available to the human cell to do repair, regeneration. In that, we start to collect DNA damage within that single human cell. And that's the hallmark of cancer in the end, is a cell that's lost its physiologic relationship to its surrounding. It's lost its shape even. A cancer cell becomes very shrunken. It can't maintain the amount of water that should normally be inside of a cell. And so it becomes desiccated and dehydrated and a lack of energy there. So there's not only a lack of soil, there's a lack of water. And a lack of soil, lack of water, and when I say soil, I'm really talking about carbon. So the carbon cycle is what the mitochondria churn out. So it's taking sunlight back out of carbon molecules by breaking the double carbon bonds that chlorophyll in the plants had put together. And so really what I'm talking about is soil and water systems, or water and carbon systems at the cellular level. And so when we diminish water and carbon cycles inside of a cell, we get an inability to repair. And in that inability to repair, we start to behave as a cancer cell. That's happening at the microscopic level in a single cell, but it's also happening at the human level, where we start to see an isolated individual who can be radicalized to go do a school shooting or to do a suicide bombing effort in some foreign country or whatever. And I'd say we even do this in a more subtle way in soldiers, whether that be child soldiers in Africa or our child soldiers in the United States. I think it's weird that we have this judgment towards child warriors at age 14 when we don't have the same judgment at 18. Suddenly it's okay to send 18-year-olds to their death, but it's not okay for 14-year-olds. Like, that's a totally bizarre, cutoff, right? And so the fact is, we've been sending children to war for eons because they're so prone to isolation of input, and it's very easy to isolate young people and therefore program them with a malignant cancer-like behavior of we're going to kill instead of strive for life. And so I believe at school shootings all the way to militaries, we've been exploiting the phenomenon of isolation leads to this malignant behavior of extractive, destructive behavior. It happens at a single cell level, happens at a societal level, and now it's happening at the global level. When a whole species separates itself from nature, the carbon water cycles die. And that's what we're seeing in Africa and around the world, is the rivers are drying up and the soil systems are dying. And so it's in our divorce from nature at the level of food systems and water systems and the like, that we become part of the problem. We become the cancer on the planet. We are sucking the life out of the larger organism because we thought we were separate from that. We became isolated and alone from that larger organism. And that's the reality for a single cell. When it loses its carbon water cycle, when it's heading towards being a cancer cell, it has no ability to make the energy it needs. So it starts extracting energy from the larger organism. And so it starts pulling energy. The only way it can survive, because it can't repair, is to divide. And so it starts to divide. And a dividing cell that just keeps copying itself is a tumor. The difference between a tumor and a cancer is really the metabolic demand on the larger organism. And so if a tumor is growing but it still is making enough energy where it doesn't suck the life out of the large organism, then it's a benign tumor. if that organism has so lost its ability to make energy that it's sucking the life out of the larger organism for its own survival, now that's a malignant cancer. So that's basically what is cancer and how it behaves, is a continued decrement in its capacity to be autonomous, to be independent, in its capacity to create energy. And so as we start to look at the cancer of humanity on a planet that is dying for its carbon and water cycles, we can look towards the phenomenon that started in the 1980s of this cancer epidemic. Like you said, you went through medical training and cancer wasn't the thing. It was HIV and it was, all these other things that were dominant players. Cancer really became the thing in the 2000s, started rippling in the 1980s, 1990s, started some alarm bells going off. By 2006, it's like, oh my gosh, we have a global epidemic of cancer in children. It's not just like our old people are getting the cancer. When I grew up was what old people got. Now we see, we have the 6 towers of hospital systems in Houston, just to Texas Children's Hospital. We're building massive cities to house our children with cancer. That didn't exist in the 1990s. And so in this short period of just a couple decades, our children have become, burdened with a disease that's demonstrating that their carbon water cycles are broken for the isolation that they are experiencing at the cellular level. So that's kind of where we stand in the world of cancer, and I'm happy to kind of take a look at maybe more of the environmental things of how did that all happen at once? How did we break it for the kids, and how did we break it for the planet? But I think at this point, it's good to get a little bit of a reaction from you.
No, for sure. And I think that's extremely well articulated, Zach, in terms of isolation and lack of connection and lack of intimacy. I think we speak about connection, but there's true connection is one of intimacy and being diverse, but coming together in unity, which I think is fundamentally important. Maybe if I know those people, they're going to ask questions about the stats, and maybe you can confirm them. I think 1 in 2 males will get cancer in their lifetime, 1 in 3 females. From what I remember, 97% of our topsoil has been destroyed. 97% of our waterways are contaminated. I think we maybe unpack those figures to a large degree. And the second part of that question, because I know this is important, is we got 2 beautiful children, blessed, and I feel it an honor as a parent to walk alongside them and to witness the love that comes through them. But I've got a 6-year-old after 10-year infertility journey. And so as I listen to you and many of the health heroes out there, and as we walk together, I'm trying to build a foundation of connection of this wonderful, beautiful Zoe, this daughter of mine, almost understanding who she is. That's why I asked you the question, who is Zach Bush? Who is SteveStavs? So that these emotions of guilt, shame, and fear do not manifest. I think the emotions are neutral, but when they continue in a way to cause damage and hold us captive to disruption and disconnection, I think what I'm hearing from you is that's when disease comes. So maybe unpack the stats first before we look at environmental factors. I think that's important. I think a lot of people don't believe, or maybe they're not aware of the real numbers of what's happening. And then secondly, I've almost got a clean slate, this beautiful daughter. I love my son as well. He's 18 now, but I've got almost a restart, if you want to say, for better words. And where do I start with belief, or where do I start with the emotions? Where do I start with her self-talk, who she says she is, and how she can stay connected?
Yeah, I think that's really the million-dollar question now, is how do we reset as a humanity so that these children have a future that includes their own children. Your fertility journey is one of those statistics, right? And so we now have 1 in 3 males infertile by sperm count, and we have 1 in 4 females infertile just by polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is only one of the many forms of female infertility. And so we are failing to be able to procreate as a society. This is how we go extinct. It's actually not cancer that causes extinction; it's the failure to reproduce that leads to that. And our current statistics are terrifying, that we may only have 60 to 80 years left as a human species based on the rate of infertility layered on top of the rate of chronic disease and the accelerated, rate of aging, basically, i.e. the shortened lifespans as expected in these next few decades. That's unacceptable, right? Like we are spiritual beings here with eons of experience, and I think we're showing up right now to change the trajectory. If I didn't think that, then I wouldn't bother with this podcast or anything else. We inherently know how to change directions, and we have the science that's already there. We've got 30 years of science to prove on which direction we should go, which is nature. We already have hundreds of years of evidence of the crisis of the empiric model of colonialism and its extractive models of human slavery, whether we're talking about slavery to children and militaries, all the way to slavery of cobalt mines in Africa so that everybody can have a cheap cell phone in the Western world, to trace mineral mines in Africa that are feeding the solar panels so that somebody can get carbon credits over in the West, and so that their wealth and they're being green and they're doing something good for the planet. And like, we are so disconnected at that macro level that your child at 6 years old is moving into a place of complete isolation from a planetary level and a humanitarian level. And so we need to devise space really for that child to refine itself. And if we keep trying to fix the problems at a micro level, I think we're going to distract the souls that are showing up right now to be the other thing. We don't have to go fix the future. We need to allow those coming through right now to be the future that we all know in our hearts is possible. And so this is a challenge, because in me is a wounded male, a wounded masculine energy and I also have the feminine within me. So I've got this perhaps unwounded feminine that wants to nurture and create and procreate and all these things. And I've got this wounded masculine that feels a burden of everything's broken, I need to fix it. And that's its value system. If I'm not fixing it, then I'm not worth anything. And I started this podcast saying that I'm a dude who likes to build things. So I'm extremely prone to this wounded masculine behavior, run around and build a bunch of things and fix everything. It's a much different attitude to take, and it's a much different spiritual discipline to move into a space of emergence of the future rather than micromanaging the future. And so now I've got teams of people around me in the for-profit and nonprofit world that are really trying to hold space and pour nurturing energy through. So a true divine masculine state of holding space for that which is already possible to emerge, rather than be done, or done to the future child. And I believe that your 6-year-old is part of a group of souls coming through. More children will be born in Africa and India over the next decade than any other previous decade. But following that, if we don't change direction, those numbers will start shrinking. Africa and India are pretty much our last place of human fertility. All of the Western world is diminishing in its fertility. The East is now diminishing in its fertility, and that includes India. Starting to see that already, and it includes the southeast parts of Asia, and it certainly includes China, which is in a massive shrinking phase of its population. So really, it's Africa and parts of Africa that are still having population growth, and the sperm counts actually increased over the last 3 decades in Africa, whereas it was collapsing elsewhere. I think, when you look at the numbers, it's not great. They're actually now at the average sperm count of the West, but they used to be very low due to, the African countries used to be very low in their sperm counts largely due to malnutrition. So as nutrition began to improve, sperm count started improving. Unfortunately, now what's being layered on top is chemical farming and agriculture that was at the root of the collapse of sperm counts elsewhere. So we have this little decade right now where Africa is now at 48 million sperm per milliliter, which is the same number as we see in the West, which means 1 in 3 males are infertile in both locations, but one place was improving while the other one was decrementing to that space. So I think we're just on the bubble. If we don't solve for a new way of being connected to nature in Africa over these next 10 years, I think the whole species is, likely to go into its senescence and into its extinction event. But we have all the tools in place to allow Africa to become Africa. Africa is the birthplace of all species. And this is the birth canal of all biodiversity on the planet. It runs from Durban, South Africa to Giza, Egypt. That meridian is, classically with Ethiopia kind of sitting in the middle of that meridian. That's where the Rift Valley is. That's where all of biodiversity of the planet sprung forth. Your country of South Africa holds 2/3 of the genetics of the planet in a single country. It's astonishing how generative Africa is as a continent of life. If there is a birth canal on this planet, it's there. Directly behind that energetic line is, if you go, right straight through the planet to the other side of the planet, is Hawaii. And Hawaii, in its indigenous, history, is understood to be the umbilicus, or the belly button, the umbilical cord for humanity. And so I find it fascinating. I lived in Hawaii for a brief time, and then find myself in Africa for the first time just months after that experience. And the idea that these ancient indigenous cultures and our anthropology has understood the energy of the earth, this belly button coming through Hawaii and then somehow delivering nutrients to a continent on the other side. Energetically, that was the birth canal of all things. I find it goosebumpy, phenomenal that these two indigenous wisdoms knew this somehow, not having known what was happening on the other side of the planet, perhaps, but for their historical ancestral, data that was stored in the DNA, perhaps. But this is a planet that births life. And whether you can wrap your head around or even start to believe me that there's an umbilical cord and a birth canal to this planet, that's up to you to decide. But as an audience, I think we can agree that life out of Africa is abundant, and it's the only place that we see keystone species still surviving. We've hunted all the other keystone species to extinction. Keystone species are critical for waterways, soil systems, and life. Without them, we lose those biologies very quickly. When we try to become the keystone species, which we've tried to do all over the world, we destroy the soil and water systems. Why is that? Why are we not behaving like a keystone species? Because it sure looks like we have the power, but why do we not have the abundant result? It's because of this cancer-like phenomenon. It's in our belief that we are separate from nature, that we have become a cancer rather than the medicine for the planet. But with this simple change in philosophy, a simple change in understanding of self-identity, we can shift from being the cancer to being the therapeutic agent, the co-creative species that would shepherd this world into a completely amazing abundant state. We already know how to regrow water systems. We already know how to regrow soil systems. It's called regenerative agriculture. It's called regenerative river system management. It's called keystone species. It's called, grassland restoration. And so all of these have been proven at millions and billions of acres globally, literally. And so we already have not only the science, we have the mechanism, and we just now need the social will, which is going to take a change in the social philosophy of who are we. And if we are going to continue to believe ourselves separate from nature and in combat with her for limited resources, and in the scarcity model that happens in separation, it will take it to its demise. If we reconnect, we're going to find out that nature is inherently abundant, not scarce. For 4 billion years, life has been emerging at more and more biodiversity and more intelligence with every single expansion of biodiversity. More biodiversity, more intelligence within a single organism, only if there's more abundance of species within that single organism. Why are humans so intelligent? It's because we have a colon that is specifically designed to hold more species of bacteria and fungi and yeast, et cetera, than any other colon in the history of life on Earth. That's fascinating to me. We only became intelligent until we had an anatomy that allowed Earth to be birthed within us. Our soil system of the colon holds more biodiversity than any other colon. fascinating. And then you find out that bacteria and fungi within the gut actually speak directly to the neurons within our brain. That's mind-blowing. And that's now been proven. UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, UCSD, San Diego, and UC Berkeley went into a really beautiful, three-pronged approach to understanding gut microbiome stuff in the last decade. And this microimaging revealed something astonishing, which was the neurons in the gut lining, which are enormous in number. There's more neurons in your gut than are in the brain of a dog. And so there's a huge, billions of nerves that are in the gut lining. And we always assumed that there was this gut barrier that was critical to be maintained, and nothing could go past that, or else it would be out in the world and be diseased. What happened with the microimaging, that technology that has come around in this last decade, is we could see that those nerve fibers were reaching outside of the gut lining to directly communicate with the bacteria and fungi sitting upon those nerve endings.
Wow.
That's new science. We don't even know the implications of that, but we know the results of that. We are an intelligent being because of the biodiversity that speaks directly to us and through us. I think it's fascinating that the human brain is not capable of coming up with an idea. The human brain is only a central processing unit chip that directs electricity to and fro. It can't initiate the information. And so my creativity, my capacity to have a new thought is my connection with nature. And we see this in major depression. The very first symptom of depression is a loss of curiosity and creativity. And we start to die in our creative capacity. And when we're not creating, we feel disconnected from self. And when we feel disconnected from self, we become homicidal and suicidal. To feel like self, to feel connected to self, you actually have to be in connection to a nature within yourself. Because yourself is not a human, yourself is an ecosystem of the earth speaking through a single organism. I am earth. I am speaking for the trees. I am speaking for the soil and water of the world because I am the soil and water of the world. I have an anatomy uniquely designed so that I would be not just the soil systems, but the river systems of the earth. My vascular tree looks exactly like the rivers of the earth. And so I've got the rivers within me. I have the soil within me, and those energies that are water and carbon and the way they dance through a whole organism of 70 trillion human cells with 1.4 quadrillion bacteria with 14 quadrillion mitochondria. That's me. I'm in a freaking ecosystem in the quadrillions of organisms that are co-creating life within this finite space that I would call a human body. Earth is speaking through me. I am Earth. It is me. And so are you. And so is the other 8 billion people here. We are, as a species, the voice box and the hands and the feet of nature. And nature is ready to speak through us and do something phenomenal. We can be the gardeners back into that Garden of Eden that is spoken of at the beginning of times. And I was just spent all weekend studying ancient Northern Africa and the ecosystems collapses and restorations that have happened for 150,000 years in North Africa that have now been mapped very carefully with genetics and core samples of the earth and all these phenomenal sciences that have come about. But for 150,000 years, we can now map back these cycles of abundance and scarcity, deserts and booming forests and all this that have happened over that course of human history. The San people, the indigenous peoples of this zone that you live in, I have 100,000 year, oral history. The Khoisan, somewhere in that 40,000 year to 100,000 year history in those different groups. The Maori people of New Zealand, or the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, or the First Nations tribes of North America, all have 40,000 year histories. So the San people, 100,000 years, the rest 40,000 years. We can say that with great confidence that we've been here through a lot of ups and downs ecologically. I don't believe that climate change is the extinction event that we're waiting for. Climate change is something that has been happening since the beginning of time on this planet. The issue is, are we undermining the ability of the planet to bloom again? Right now, we're in a desertification mode of the planet. It's disappearing. Is our behavior truncating the capacity of this world to now regenerate, which is what it always does? After every great extinction is a massive rebirth, and the species are more diverse and the intelligence at a higher level with each of those re-expressions. So we are now at a re-expression moment on the planet. It will bloom again, with or without us, is the question. Human behavior right now is keeping her pressed down so she can't bounce up again. She can't do her natural springtime regrowth because of our cancer-like behavior on the planet for the breaking of the carbon water cycles that we're doing at the global level and at the cellular level within us. And so there's this opportunity for us to really, become the greatest thing that's ever happened here, because we are the expression of nature, and nature will express itself new through us, and we will reach a higher level of intelligence if we choose to stay and play.
Sure. Wow. So we were made from dust, and dust we're going to go into. And just spent 5 days in the bush in the Waterberg with my family. Wonderful time, disconnected from the systems of this world and connected to one another, spending time running in a reserve, ran into this wonderful, huge bull, this elephant with massive tusks, like 30 years old, and just embracing just the different parts of the bush. But taking what you said now, Zach, the practicality of me living in Johannesburg, running a practice for 24 years as a doctor of Chinese medicine and acupuncture. I know that you've had an incredible history of acupuncture, but the practicality of getting reconnected to one another. I think of Nelson Mandela, I am because we are, this community, this circle of hearing one another, then connecting to nature. How does this practically work out? Do we do the Joel Salatin? I had him on the podcast. And do we start these regenerative farms? Do I go live with Angus, at the Spear Wine Estate? I mean, just the practicality of breaking the scarcity mindset, adopting an abundance mindset that I can trust people within a circle, that we could live for one another in diversity, but in unity. I hold this precious, beautiful family of mine, especially the 6-year-old, and I say, what are the practical outworkings of reconnecting to one another and reconnecting to nature?
Yeah, we are blessed with a team there in South Africa that's working on a model of emergence, I would say. How do we allow this future to emerge rather than be microengineered or micromanaged? And our teams are really skilled in that they've been doing this for 40 years. These are the teams that ended apartheid with Mandela and the like, and the way in which they did that was incredibly organic, in that they started in the smallest and most impoverished communities and helped those communities envision a different future for themselves that didn't include external inputs, from a colonial government handing out social safety nets or social, wellness or things like this. How do you become your own destiny? How do you become a co-creator of that destiny? And that's what Jay Naidu and Gavin Anderson and so many, incredible leaders in that time around Mandela managed to do, was to listen in and to inspire communities to create their own future. The, feedback from Jay and many of the other leadership there is that what got left out of that anti-apartheid movement was nature and the voice of women. And I think that that's a really poignant observation, that we will build short-term solutions if it's built from the masculine archetype, because again, we're trying to fix something. If instead the masculine holds space for the future to be birthed through it, now it's holding its divine identity. And so what is it practically that we need to do? Within each of us lies the divine masculine that is currently, I think, wounded deeply out of a belief that we are somehow responsible for providing for families, providing for the earth, providing for this. And so we start building sociopolitical systems with short-term goals of more wealth so that we can protect people, so that we can provide for people, not realizing that, we're against nature by that very belief that men within humankind are going to be the provider. the divine source of nature, that has birthed humanity on this earth, has to be the source of all things, not the man in the household. And so we need to, as men, start to hold space for nature to birth through us. And what that feels like is a lot of listening and stillness, which is the opposite of what we're metriced on, right? You're metriced as a good man or a good, performer, female or male. You're metriced in a male society and a masculine expression of society by your productivity, right? And so it's this moment of pause that we must take. We must sit for a moment, pause, and really feel into the possibility that nature is trying to birth herself through us rather than us trying to fix something or to save something. We can't save nature, but she's trying to save us. And so that's something that, I think the activists are going to have to take a pause with too. And I participate in these large nonprofits, and it's always tempting to be the solution, when in fact we just need to hold space for nature to re-express itself within a community, within a household, within a child. And if we hold space and say, nature knows how to do this, and it's going to start to express it, we're going to do that. So the way that we're doing that on the ground, and the way that it was done for the anti-apartheid movement very effectively, I think, is to start doing community mapping. Let's stop and listen to our neighbors. What talents do you have? Oh, that's the woman that always feeds the kids at the end of the day, no matter what. She's always out there. She's the grandmother that's, feeding the kids, or that's the grandmother that always steps in when the mother needs to go work, over there, whatever it is. So start helping each household and community member start to map the resources that are already there at the human level. Oh, that's the guy that always at the end of work starts a soccer game and teaches kids, football there in the field. That map is so powerful because it's an immediate reset of, like, we don't have enough stuff, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough money to be thriving, to the realization of, oh my God, we have so much human talent that is applying itself productively every single day in this community. All right, so then you start to map those human resources. Then you start to layer on top of that mapping of the natural resources. My gosh, there's a mango tree in that yard. There's 2 avocado trees over there in that yard. There's, a moringa tree growing on the corner there that nobody's taking responsibility for. You start to map those natural resources. Oh my gosh, there's a stream that used to run here. It's dry now, but we remember there was water in this one time. So there's a stream potential right there. Oh, that river is full of trash now. That's our dump, but it used to be the headwaters of the river. So you start to map those natural resources, and then the community starts to identify, here's the priorities. Here's what we could do right now to get the water flowing again. We need to capture rainwater as we used to. We used to do it in ponds and work with keystone species to work with water management. Now we can do it with JoJo tanks or whatever we need to in these rural communities that are built on the headwaters of rivers. And so we can start, that process at that community level. So mapping resources outside of the current economic model of resources is a really powerful reframing. Oh yeah, we are creatures within nature. Let's map ourselves back into nature. And in that, we can refine ourselves. We can rediscover the abundance that was already provided for us. And through us, we have ingenious minds because we are nature speaking through a human being. Let nature start to speak through us at that community level. And that's going to start to birth communities that are resilient and independent. And so they have food resiliency and independence. They have water resiliency and independence. And they have educational and cultural roots that are inherent within the community. That grandmother remembers how to teach preventive and wellness medicine to her children. That guy over there knows how to build, infrastructure and how to move water to and fro, whatever it is. And so that it starts to be this wealth map on a different measurement of wealth. And you suddenly realize you don't need money, you need cooperation. And that's how nature has been doing her work, is through a cooperative, collaborative visioning of a more diverse, more beautiful future. And so we start designing communities and community communications around this abundance that lies within us. We must have abundance lying within us because we have nature within us. And so with that reframing, I think we're going to simply express a different version of community. We're going to certainly develop a different version of city development, right? We're not going to just have, chlorinated municipal water systems. We're going to have water catchment. We're going to take rain back in. We're going to put our water back into soil systems. We're going to return the mycelium and fungi and biodiversity in our yards as a priority. Every single house could have 10 food producing plants, trees, bushes, etc., as part of the approval to get a building built. You can't build a house unless it's got 10 food producing plants in the yard and the infrastructure to support those plants. That can be decided on by a single community today. And the government could be behind that. The regulators could be behind that. And the education system could be behind that. And so it's a very interesting future that we sit on, is that it's so simple in the end to build a different future. We just have to realize the architect is not humans. The architect is nature itself, which is to say that the architect is biodiversity speaking through us.
Wow. And so that often could, if you look at it, Africa is probably a prime place that could happen just because of the landscape that it is. And do you foresee that these communities are going to be fertile? They're going to be disease-free. They're going to be places of joy and peace and just serenity. They're going to be places where the human expression is witnessed, where love is going to abound. Is that what you foresee? And then the rest of the world is going to look and say, hang on, we're living in a very competitive environment. We're living in a very cutthroat environment or urbanized environment of building systems and processes and not human capital. They're going to look to these communities and realize, hang on, this is the way to have wholeness and health.
Yeah, we don't have to wait for them to realize that either. We're at this tipping point of the malignant behavior of humans to necessitate all of that right now. And so a cancer becomes fatal when the resources of the greater organism can no longer provide the energy for the tumor, and then the organism dies. So when the metabolic demand of the cancer cells outstrips the ability of that human to bring in nature, to eat, to fuel up, and to turn that back into energy, and can no longer support the cancer, then that organism dies. That's happening on the planetary level. The cancers, the large tumors that have formed on this planet, are called cities. And those cities from space look exactly like cancer cells and tumors under the microscope. They build these long strands of resource movement back towards themselves. In the human body, that's blood vessels and nerves. In the city design, that's highways, train lines, and the like that are bringing resources into these tumors. And so from when I fly all the time, I get to see the cancer of humanity every day. From 30,000 feet, it just looks like tumor, 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 extracting from the earth itself with these long supply chains. The biggest cancer on the planet right now is the United States of America. We extend our blood vessels out over the entire globe and extract resources back to these cities. Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, Miami. These cities are sucking resources out of it, and they're expressing that wealth as Lamborghinis and multi-million-dollar homes and all kinds of completely useless trappings of wealth, which is, of course, the malignancy, is that none of that actually supports life. So we're extracting from the whole world and then using that wealth in an arbitrary model of economy that has nothing to do with supporting life on Earth. And our billionaires are building spaceships to go try to get to Mars. And so, this is the cancer of the planet, is this human organism of cancer. Fortunately, tumors often kill themselves because they can no longer maintain the supply line, and they start to die without any chemotherapy or anything else because they lose enough fuel to that single tumor. And so it's very typical. In fact, 100% of tumors will have a rotting core with them when they get to a certain size because they can't maintain enough nutrient to them. And so they metastasize. Okay, so we have to go build another city over there. And so let's move to the liver, let's move to the lung, let's move to the bone. That's metastatic cancer where the tumors are now bouncing around because the single tumor can no longer get in enough resources. That's what's happening in the cities with the pandemic. For the first time, we see metastases heading out. So New York actually shrank during the pandemic. Los Angeles shrank, and people went to small towns all over the world saying, hey, I think I really want a different future for my kids where I want them in nature and I'm going to go out and all this. But fast forward 2 years later, we see them now creating mini New Yorks, mini Los Angeleses in these, small rural towns that they move to because they actually want the same things that they had back in the day. It turns out it's really hard to grow your food every day and work in isolation and try to create everything on your own. And so you're like, you know what, that was actually pretty good to have a Starbucks down the road, or that was actually pretty good having, my food prepared for me by the restaurants or whatever. So then you start building that infrastructure into the new town, and now you have a new tumor coming together. And so we metastasized as humans over the last 2 years into rural and more small town kind of environments. And now we're trying to adopt the old cancer behavior of scarcity rather than abundance. So that's what's happening right now. But I see that Africa could do it differently. Africa is right now really, if there's one place that's being most extracted, it's Africa. If it's the second place, it's probably somewhere between South America and China. Yeah, so these continents are being sucked dry as all of the blood vessels and nerves of all of the industrialized Western economies and Eastern economies start to, continue to extract and suck, those nutrients. So who's going to create the new normal? Where's the birth of the new future? And I really, every single day, get more and more confident that is Africa. And I'm very, very excited to see Africa re-express itself. And you can go to any African country right now and you'll hear the term Africanization. We need to Africanize our economies. We need to Africanize our education systems. It's a recognition of every one of those, 50 plus countries that this is not the time to adopt Western behavior. They're all dying out there from their behavior. We don't want that. Yeah. And let me be somebody from the West to tell everybody in Africa, do not go down the path we went down. Not only are we killing ourselves and our children, we're killing your children. And so let me first of all apologize to everybody in Africa for my 400 years of ancestral behavior that was that industrialized machine sucking the life out of you and your cultures and your children, and putting economic models together that would not only be imperial, would also build things like cobalt mines in the middle of Africa and the like. So I feel a deep sorrow in myself that I am part of that ancestral lineage that can't be shifted. That's just the reality of me. I am a 400-year-old organism that currently lives through a single body that dates back 40,000 generations before that, probably too. But I can show you my ancestral map back to the moment that my ancestors landed on the shores of North America. And so in that 400-year history, I know the cancerous behavior that has resulted from this effort towards imperial extraction of energy for the cancerous-like belief within me that I am separate from nature.
Sure.
And so I can begin in India, and I can begin in Africa, I can begin in other places with a deep apology for my ancestral behavior, for my ancestral fear, and now my ancestral guilt and shame that keeps me in a low vibration state of cooperation and collaboration with all of you. I am eager to forgive myself and for me to ask for your forgiveness as well, so that I can keep rising in my vibration to become somebody who you would want as a collaborator for the planet, for this future where we're reconnected to our nature. And so it begins at a deep apology. In receiving forgiveness, we each rise. And it's in this cycle of apology, forgiveness, re-expression of thank you, the gratitude, and then finally the expression of love. That 4-step process is what we're in the midst of now. And I can begin that with each of you. I can begin that process of the deep apology, but it's going to take a communion. It's going to take us coming together for the forgiveness to occur, and then for the gratitude to occur, and then for the love to emerge. And that's the very succinct, steps forward that we now get to participate in. And if we don't, the writing's on the wall. We already know our demise. We know down to probably 10 to 20 year accuracy when we disappear. It's so simple, and it's going to take so much humility and vulnerability, transparency. We're going to have to fumble the ball many times in this process. We're going to have a lot of fits and starts. We're going to have to make a lot of mistakes, because there is no previous template for us to reach for here. We've all been the cancer of humanity. We have collectively done the cancer of humanity together. Now we need to reintegrate into our original body and re-express the human body as a human species. And for that, we have to get rid of fear, guilt, and shame through a process of apology, forgiveness, gratitude, and love. And we're going to realize a different future is going to birth right through us as nature re-expresses itself through our genetics, through our minds, and through our spirits, when we have come into line with one another, which is to say, into line with nature itself.
Well, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable and being the witness to so many people in those areas. Thank you for just your heart of love for many, many people, for Africans. I love this country and I love this continent, and grateful for you to just be a part of that and for us to cooperate and collaborate together. Before we end, I know it's the end of the show, but just Farmer's Footprint and Journey of Intrinsic Health, I think those are two important things that people can connect with. We'll put everything in the show notes, but possibly just give us a quick wrap on how important those two areas are to you.
Yeah. I think, I'm eager for these things to re-express themselves in Africa. Farmer's Footprint, we founded in the United States about 5 years ago, and we developed a technique for storytelling as a method for transformation. And so we allowed farmers to start to tell their own stories of transformation through the regenerative agricultural practices that they were discovering. And we found that every farmer had a different version of regeneration. Every farmer had a different story into their own new wealth and their own new prosperity found in their own independence from chemical companies, from chemical inputs and fertilizers and herbicides, pesticides, everything that was making them go bankrupt. They let go of all of that and let nature re-express itself within their piece of land. And of course, every piece of land, every piece of nature would express itself differently. And so we have 100 or so stories told now around the country and around the world of regeneration happening through people rather than from people. And so Farmer's Footprint US was spawned. That's now been a fertile place for rebirth. So we birthed Farmer's Footprint Australia, Farmer's Footprint UK, and is currently coming off the ground. Farmer's Footprint New Zealand is marked out for sometime later this year. And we're hoping Farmer's Footprint South Africa gets its foothold this year as well. And so I'll be back there again in April. I was there a couple of times last year, and eager to be back there again a couple of times this year to keep the momentum building towards South Africa's ability to express Farmer's Footprint. Farmer's Footprint, that the name came from an incredible Japanese proverb that says that the best fertilizer for a garden is the farmer's footprint. And that is a beautiful story of nature's, well, not only welcoming us into reality, but nature's value for humans. Nature wanted humans to walk on her surface. And we have seen that when people walk and witness nature, nature thrives more. In the Judeo-Christian world, this has been called, humanity has been called the bride of Christ, or the bride of Source, To be a spouse to nature is to be its witness. And we all our drive towards partnership, whether it's marriage or some other model, we drive for that deep in our subconscious systems, and our social systems reinforce that, because it is important to be seen. It is important to have our beauty witnessed. That's why the farmer's footprint is such an incredible fertilizer for Earth, is she wants to be seen. And so we have an opportunity to become the witness to the beauty of nature. And when our feet become the modus of reconnection, Earth thrives. And we've seen that with the keystone species. When the lion puts its paw print back on Earth and is allowed to become the keystone species in a small territory, Earth thrives, the water systems return. When the bison, the buffalo of North America, put their hooves on Earth, the rivers start to flow again. When the paw of the wolf is returned to Yellowstone National Park in northern parts of the United States, the river systems flow again, and it is restored. The footprint of the farmer is the best fertilizer. When we humble ourselves to the point of just being witness as farmers rather than extractive as farmers, we will see Earth thrive beneath our feet, and we can rebirth that regenerative future. So farmer's footprint is something to take a look at as what's been expressed in North America, Australia, elsewhere. But we're most excited, for Africa to begin to express its story of witness to its own beauty, of witness to its own Earth, and for humanity there in Africa to step into that keystone relationship of, we can put our feet back on this Earth, and this Earth will respond with love and abundance in measures that we can't even imagine. So that's farmersfootprint.us. You can take a look at farmersfootprint.org.australia.aus is another one. But ultimately, I would take confidence that this movement is moving globally. But more importantly than my websites or my resources out there, I would start to remap your household in its wealth, and start to reimagine nature expressing itself through each of you in the household, each of you in the extended family, each of you in the extended community, and start to remap your own wealth map towards an abundant future where nature is expressing itself through every relationship you have. And you'll be part of that future. It will emerge through you. And I'll be honored to be witness to that.
Thank you, Zach Bush. I'm going to leave an African word. I'm sure you know it. I said to you when I met you, Sawubona, I see you. I pray and I trust that you would use that word as a declaration, an African declaration, as you see so many people. So Zach Bush, Sawubona, I see you. I declare favor and blessing over you, that your light would continue to resonate, that your vibration would rise as you hold space, as you connect with others. Thank you that we are distance away, but our hearts and minds have connected. And so I look forward to embracing you again as you embraced me that day when I met you. And these are the things we can share together. So bless you.
Beautiful. And
look forward to seeing you soon.
Sawubona, Steve. Thank you. Thank you for being you. I appreciate you. Sawubona.